Most Final Fantasy games are based on a central theme. Final Fantasy VII is environmental stewardship, 9 is finding home, 10 is sacrifice, 12 is centered on remaking Star Wars. Final Fantasy VIII is a love story. While Final Fantasy games have had copious romance in the past, Cecil and Rosa, Cloud and both Tifa and Aeris, Zidane and Garnet, Titus and Yuna, the romance generally played as a subplot. Even that Titus and Yuna relationship has more to say about what those characters are willing to give up for the greater good than it has to say about love. When you ask yourself, what is Final Fantasy VIII actually about, it's hard to find a real answer buried in the central plot about time-traveling witches. The game leans into the dangers of authoritarian regimes and has a little to say about corruption and abuse of power, but the core story is pretty abstract, weird, and off the wall. That focus on Squall and Rinoa, as well as Laguna's romantic pursuits in particular, and Irvine's early penchant for hitting on anything that moves, makes Final Fantasy VIII a unique experience compared to its peers. This week, Final Fantasy VIII Remastered has been released, so what better time to revisit the PS1 classic and see how it holds up with a new coat of paint. First released in 1999, yes, Final Fantasy VIII being 20 years old makes me feel incredibly old too. FF8 was a stark shift from the lumpy character models of Final Fantasy VII. Suddenly, everybody was well proportioned and looked like real human beings, not a bizarre collection of block parts. That is the biggest upgrade in the remaster. All of the character models have been updated, so the meme about Squall's monstrous deformed PS1 face being the best looking guy at the party no longer applies. Those models all look nice, but they can jar pretty horribly with the old PS1 backgrounds. There are some instances where some of those background students are actual models and some are just part of the scenery, and it looks hilariously wrong. There are even a couple of scenes where a main character like Cid just becomes an indecipherable blob in the background. From a content perspective, it's the exact same game as it was 20 years ago, but there are some lovely quality of life features added. The best being a 3x speed up option that makes the grind so much more bearable. There's also a no encounters option and a setting that basically makes you unbeatable in battles, so if you want to just blitz through the story, you can. The world of Final Fantasy VIII still stands out above all else. The game is set in a military academy at Balamb Garden. Your cast of characters are members of SEED, a group of mercenaries sent out to intervene in conflict and turmoil around the world. SEED feels like it should be an acronym for something, maybe Super Educated Earth Defenders, or Sorceress Eradication and Extinction Department, but it's not. It's just what they're called. I guess the idea is meant to be seeds are growing in the garden, but I prefer my acronyms. You have Squall, the stoic loner leader who's just kind of a jerk and whose catchphrase is whatever. Zell, who was my favourite character when I was a kid because 10-year-old me thought a hoverboard was the coolest thing imaginable. Quistis, who did her darndest to get fired as an instructor after hitting on her student. Selphie, who likes trains and is kind of a psychopath. Rinoa, the primary love interest of the game who falls head over heels in love with Cypher, but will have to settle for Squall. And Irvine, the sharpshooting ladies man who shoots every shot and never lands one. That cast does, however, pale in comparison to Laguna, Kyros, and Ward. The game frequently takes you away from your regular heroes to the whimsical adventures of Laguna and company in dream sequences that are explained later in the story. And honestly, I've always wished the whole game focused on them. The dynamic between the three brings a sense of humour and charm the game doesn't always have. The freewheeling adventurousness of Laguna is meant to contrast with Squall's morose angst, but instead it overwhelms it. I've beaten the game probably 4 or 5 times now, and I always look forward to those Laguna segments. Some of that may be that they're designed to be a change of pace, a testament to the game's generally exemplary pacing, but I'm always bummed to be dragged back to Squall after each of them. While the world is generally engrossing, multiple military academies, major towns and cities connected by trains, I, like Selphie, also like trains, major isolated countries, and Fisherman's Horizon. Fisherman's Horizon may be my favourite video game town ever. The story told across that world varies wildly. It's a sprawling tale of warring countries, multiple generations of sorceresses, possession, time travel, and a tale that loops on itself at some stage. It's wild. But as I said at the start, all of that is a framework to put obstacles between Squall and Rinoa's fated love. It's all a question of what those characters are willing to go through to be together. As a result, most of the other main characters tend to take a backseat as the game progresses, aside from Laguna, whose character arc is the most interesting and satisfying in the game. Many of the story reveals are cool. The nature of Seed, the history of sorceresses, the way the disparate elements of the plot all connect make for a fun ride, but there are some truly laughable plot twists along the way. There's one real big one in the middle of the game that, I don't know man, it's among the stupidest crap in any game known to man. That still all adds up pretty well, but that bit in the middle, super dumb. The variety in the game scenarios helps the game rise above an RPG grind. The opening mission to Dalit sets the tone for a plot full of action. That cutscene as your boat rushes on shore under fire and the subsequent sequence is exhilarating. The game strives for that kind of variety all the way through. Whether you're staging a daring prison escape through a series of seemingly endless circular floors, planning a covert assassination, or stealthily invading a missile silo, the game keeps throwing interesting and unique scenarios at you that are a big step above the average RPG. Go to this dungeon, then go to the next dungeon, then go to the next dungeon. There's always a real urgency that moves you on to your next big set piece. That variety also extends to the game's side quests. There are a ton of different little things to chase down in the game, but none of them are deeper or more engaging than Triple Triad, Final Fantasy VIII's in-game card game. The premise is pretty simple. You and your opponent have 5 cards each, and you attempt to capture your opponent's card by placing a card with a greater attack value next to it. Working your way through the game, hunting down rare character cards, and adapting to each region's unique rules helps create what may be the best minigame in Final Fantasy history. Not to mention, you can refine rare cards for some pretty awesome rewards. The battle system has always been one of Final Fantasy VIII's most divisive elements. The junction system revolves around assigning GFs, or Guardian Forces, the game's version of summons, to each character, then assigning magic to help augment a particular stat. Rather than draining MP, you have a finite number of spells that you can increase by drawing them from your enemies. It is a much different setup than any other Final Fantasy game, even if it probably shares most with Final Fantasy VI's Esper system. It creates a strange dynamic where you want to hoard your spells rather than use them, because using them will decrease your stats. Leveling up is much less important too, because enemies in the game scale with your levels. You mostly want to battle to win AP and unlock new abilities rather than to level up your characters. I admire them going for something pretty different, but the system is pretty easy to manipulate to just break the game, especially the further you get in and the stronger magic you find. At the same time though, that kind of flexibility is neat. If you understand the system, you can really get the most out of it. In terms of combat, it's a turn-based RPG. The commands you can use depend on the GFs you have equipped, and each character is mostly differentiated by their weapon and their limit breaks. Again, similar to Final Fantasy VI's Desperation attacks, limit breaks become more likely to activate the lower your HP is, unless you use the Aura spell. This creates a fun risk-reward dynamic. You can take the chance of being in critical HP to activate your limit breaks every turn, but this obviously leaves you much more vulnerable to game overs, even while the difficulty curve of the game can be totally sidestepped. It's at the very least an interesting combat system, even if a lot of people really hate it. But I don't know, it's pretty fun. I think this playthrough has landed me on the side of, it's cool that you can break it. Revisiting Final Fantasy VIII 20 years later, it's easy to see why so many people love it. It creates a fascinating world, a plot full of deep and occasionally nonsensical lore, a battle system with so much depth that it can be utterly broken, a plot that constantly propels itself along with big, memorable settings and moments, and a cast of characters that are likable and interesting. And Squall too, I guess. And it's all made more approachable and streamlined with the remastered release, plus slightly easier to look at. Its focus on love makes it feel complex and human, more relatable than a majority of the games in the series. There is of course one important caveat to all of this review. If the Squall is dead theory is true, then this game becomes the greatest work of art of all time. Look it up, Google Squall is dead. Final Fantasy VIII gets 9 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching. It's always interesting every time I play through this game. As I said, this is probably like the 4th or 5th time I played through it all. I realized just how little of it I understood when I was 10. Like literally none of it. This entire game went over my head when I was 10. But regardless, it's a real good game. Give it a go. It's available on all systems now, so you have no excuse. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like or a subscribe or a comment. Let me know your memories of Final Fantasy VIII. On your left, a review of Whipsy and the Lost Atlas, which is not a Kirby clone, definitely not a Kirby clone. and on your right, why the Black Mage Village in Final Fantasy IX is really darn cool. Thanks for watching.